At midnight, my son called me, his voice shaking. Dad, don't turn on the lights. Go to the shed behind the garden now, and don't let anyone know I called. I thought he was in danger. But minutes later, through a crack in the dark shed wall, I saw a stranger slip into my house, moving carefully like a thief. Then another voice spoke from inside the darkness, a voice so familiar I had heard it almost every day under my own roof. And that was when I realized this was not a break-in. It was betrayal. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here. That is not something I take lightly. Before we go further, leave a comment. Where in the world are you right now? City, state, country, let me know. Some details in this story have been crafted for narrative and educational purposes. Similarities to any names or places are purely coincidental, but what this story leaves behind, I hope stays with you. I used to sleep well in this house. 51 years, and this place on Birchwood Lane never once gave me a reason to be afraid. Eleanor used to say that a house absorbs the love you put into it that walls remember. I believed her. I still do. What I did not believe was that a house could also absorb betrayal without anyone noticing. That Tuesday night in September, I was lying on my side of the bed, always my side, never hers. Not once in 18 months had I been able to bring myself to sleep in the center, staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow in the dark. My chest had that hollow ache it always carried after midnight, the kind that no doctor can treat because it has nothing to do with the heart muscle and everything to do with the person who used to sleep 3 inches away from me. The phone lit up the nightstand like a flare. My hand shot out before the second ring. Midnight calls only ever mean one thing, and my body knew it before my brain did. Adrian? Dad. His voice hit me like a fist, low compressed, scraped raw at the edges. Not the voice of a man who had dialed the wrong number. The voice of a man trying very hard not to sound like he was falling apart. Dad, listen to me carefully. Are you alone? My spine went rigid. I'm in bed. What's happening? Are you hurt? I'm not hurt, but I need you to do exactly what I say, and I need you to do it right now. A sharp breath. Don't turn on any lights, not one. Get up. Go downstairs through the kitchen and go out the back door to the storage shed behind the garden, the wooden one by the back fence. Go inside and lock the bolt from the inside. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Adrian, you're scaring me. Tell me what... Dad? His voice dropped to something barely above a breath, and what I heard underneath it made the hair on my arm stand straight up. Please, don't ask me right now. Just go. And whatever you do, do not let Ethan or Vanessa know I called. The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone pressed against my sternum, my pulse thundering the room, suddenly feeling 3 degrees colder than it had a minute ago. My first instinct was to call him back. My second instinct, the quiet one, the one that lives behind the ribs and rarely speaks, told me that if Adrian said, "Do not turn on the lights," there was a reason for it that I did not yet understand, but needed to respect immediately. I found my slippers in the dark. My hands were shaking not from cold, not from age, but from that specific terror that only a parent knows when a child calls at midnight sounding like that. The hallway stretched out ahead of me, dark and familiar. I had walked it 10,000 times. I knew which floorboard creaked third from the left at the top of the stairs, and I stepped around it out of instinct. At the far end of the hall behind a closed door, I could hear the slow rhythm of Vanessa's breathing, deep, even, undisturbed. I moved past her door without making a sound. Downstairs, the microwave clock glowed 12:16 in pale green. I crossed the kitchen, unlocked the back door, slow no click, one hand steadying the latch, and stepped out into the night. The September air came at me hard, cold, and damp, carrying the smell of wet grass and oak leaves and something sharper underneath, like soil freshly turned. The garden stretched out ahead of me, 20 yards of darkness between the house and the back fence. And I crossed it by memory alone, 30 years of muscle memory, guiding my feet around the stone path, past the rose bushes Eleanor had planted the year Noah was born, toward the small wooden shed, crouching under the oak tree at the far end. I pulled the shed door open, hinges groaning, just slightly stepped inside, and drove the bolt home. Inside smelled like motor oil and clay pots and old wood and the particular sadness of things that had once been useful. I pressed my back against the rear wall, my chest heaving, my knees unsteady beneath me, and I waited in the absolute dark. What is happening? I whispered to no one. What on God's earth is happening? No answer. Just the oak tree moving overhead and the distant sound of a car somewhere on the main road, and then cutting through both of those the soft crunch of tires on gravel. A car was pulling in from the service lane on the side of the property. Slowly, no headlights, my whole body went cold. I dropped to one knee, pressed my eye to the gap between two warped planks, and watched. The car rolled in without headlights, engine barely above a whisper, and parked along the side fence where the oak branches hung low enough to swallow the roofline whole. My knee was grinding against the shed's dirt floor. I did not move. I did not breathe. Two doors opened. No dome light, they had killed it deliberately. Two figures stepped out into the dark, and even at this distance, even with nothing but cloud-filtered moonlight to see by my body, recognized the taller one before my mind caught up. That walk, that slight forward lean left shoulder dropped half an inch lower than the right. I had watched that walk learn itself, stumble through childhood, straighten into a man. I had been proud of that walk once. Ethan! The word came out of me as nothing more than a breath, soundless, swallowed immediately by the dark of the shed. But my hand found the plank wall beside me and gripped it hard enough that the wood bit into my palm, and I was grateful for the pain because it meant I was still standing. The second man I did not recognize. Shorter, built like someone who moved furniture for a living, carrying a duffel bag that hung heavy on his left side. He moved with the practiced quiet of someone who had done this kind of work before scanning the exterior of the house with quick, methodical eyes, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Ethan punched the back door code, 4 digits, the same code we had used for 11 years, the month and year Eleanor and I got married. I had never changed it. I had never thought I needed to. The lock released with a soft click. They went inside. I pressed both hands flat against the shed wall and tried to slow my breathing. Tried to tell myself there was a reasonable explanation. Tried to locate the version of this where my son was not standing in my house at 12:30 in the morning with a man I had never seen before. I could not find that version. I looked for it, and it was simply not there. Through the kitchen window, the one above the sink that always fogged on cold mornings, the one Eleanor had hung yellow curtains on in 2003, and I had never had the heart to replace, I could see a thin beam of flashlight moving through the ground floor. It swung left at the hallway and disappeared toward my study. No! The word came out before I could stop it, barely above a breath. No, no, no! My study held the house deed, the foundation incorporation papers, Eleanor's original trust summary, 3 decades of our family's legal history, every document that said this house and this legacy belonged to us, organized in a fireproof cabinet I had always considered excessive. Eleanor had insisted on it. She had always been the careful one. I pressed my eye back to the gap and watched the light move behind the kitchen window. My chest was so tight I could feel individual heartbeats like someone knocking from the inside, urgent wanting out. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. Then the flashlight beam swung back through the hallway. The back door opened. Ethan stepped out first, holding it wide. The second man followed, and now the duffel bag he carried hung heavier than before, fuller, stiffer, packed with something flat and rectangular. I knew what shape documents made when you rolled them into a bag. I had moved enough offices in my life to know that shape. They were 3 feet from the door when Ethan spoke, his voice dropping low, but cutting clean through the night air. Did you get all of it? The other man zipped the bag shut. Deeds, the corporate filings, the family trust summary. The amendment pages weren't in the cabinet, they must be with the attorney. Wells has them. Ethan's voice was completely flat. Not nervous, not conflicted. Flat in the way a man sounds when he has already made peace with every decision that brought him to this moment. It doesn't matter. Vanessa already did her part. My grip on the plank tightened so hard, I felt something crack the wood, or my hand, I still am not certain which. Vanessa already did her part. I turned those words over, pressing them like a bruise to see how deep the damage went. Part of what? Of caring for me. Of the medication she laid out each morning in that little ceramic dish, of the months of soft conversation and warm dinners, and the patient, gentle way she had filled the silence Eleanor left behind. I wanted to believe it meant something innocent. I wanted that so badly I could taste it. But standing in that shed with my heart slamming against my ribs and my legs barely holding me upright, I knew the way you know things you have been avoiding for a long time, that innocent was not the right word for any of this. The car doors closed. The engine turned over. They reversed out of the service lane without headlights and were gone. I stayed in the shed until I was certain they were not coming back. Then I crossed the yard. In the dark, went in through the back door and walked straight to my study. The filing cabinet drawer stood slightly open. Not wide, just enough that someone in a hurry to appear careful had not quite pushed it all the way home. I pulled it open fully. The hanging files where the house deed and foundation papers had lived were empty, the little plastic tab holders still labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. My eyes burned. I pressed 2 fingers against them hard. "She wrote those labels?" I said to the empty room. My voice came out ragged, scraped thin at the edges. "She sat right here and wrote every one of those labels." Then behind me, a voice. "Richard." Vanessa stood in the doorway of the study, one hand resting on the frame hair, loose around her shoulders, wearing the gray robe she always wore on cool nights. Her eyes went from my face to the open cabinet and back again, quick as a camera shutter. "What are you doing up?" she asked, soft, easy, like a woman with nothing at all to hide. My jaw tightened. I looked straight at her. "Same as you, I suppose." She tilted her head just slightly and gave me that warm, practiced smile, the one that had reassured me 100 times over 14 months. "Come back to bed, sweetheart. You'll wear yourself out." I followed her up the stairs. My hands were still trembling. My chest felt like something essential had been quietly removed from it, without anesthesia, no warning, no noise, just gone. I did not sleep, not even close. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about the 5 words I had heard through a crack in a garden shed wall, and how they had just rearranged every single thing I believed about the last 14 months of my life. By the time the sun came up, I had not slept a single minute. I got out of bed at 6:15, pulled on my robe, and went downstairs before Vanessa stirred. The house was cold the way houses get in September, when the heat has not yet been turned on, for the season, that particular chill that settles into the corners and reminds you that the summer is finished. I went to the living room, lowered myself into Eleanor's armchair, and held my coffee with both hands, and let the warmth travel up through my palms. Her chair. I never sat in it when she was alive. She had claimed it 30 years ago, and that was simply that. Now I sat in it almost every morning, and I was not sure whether that was grief or stubbornness or something in between. I looked at her photograph on the mantel. That smile, the one where her eyes did the work and her mouth just followed along. I had fallen in love with that smile at a faculty dinner in 1972, and I had spent the next 51 years being grateful I had not talked myself out of approaching her. "Eleanor," I said quietly to the empty room, my voice rough from a night without sleep. What did I miss? She did not answer, of course. She never did anymore. But I kept talking to her anyway, the way I had every morning since March of last year, because the alternative was a silence I could not yet survive. She had been gone 18 months. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in December, gone by March, the cruelest kind of fast. The doctors had used words like aggressive and advanced. And I had sat in that consultation room, holding her hand so tightly that she had laughed and said, "Richard, you're going to break my fingers and I'm going to need those." Even then, even in that room, she had made me laugh. After she died, the house became a different place. Not haunted, just hollowed, like a book with the best chapters torn out. I moved through the rooms and recognized everything and felt nothing familiar at all. Ethan started coming by more often, twice a week, then 3 times, then almost every day. "Dad, you can't keep eating cereal for dinner." He had stood in my kitchen doorway one evening, arms crossed, wearing that look he got when he was about to organize something. "Let me help. That's what I'm here for." I had been so grateful. I am ashamed of how grateful I was. He was the one who suggested Vanessa. 6 months after Eleanor passed, he had called on a Sunday morning and said, "Dad, there's someone I want you to meet. Nothing formal, just lunch. She volunteers with the foundation she's been asking about you." I had almost said no. I had been saying no to everything for 6 months. "Just lunch," Ethan had said. "1 hour. If you hate it, I'll never bring it up again." The restaurant was a small Italian place in Westport. White tablecloths, too much basil, the kind of place Eleanor would have loved. Vanessa was already seated when we arrived. 34 years old, dark hair, pulled back, dressed simply in a way that said she had not tried too hard. She stood when she saw us, and her first words were not about the weather or the foundation or anything polite and forgettable. She looked at me and said, "Ethan told me about Eleanor. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale. She sounded like someone worth knowing." My throat closed up on me without warning. I had to clear it twice before I could speak. "She was," I managed. she really was. Vanessa had smiled, not the big reassuring smile people aim at the grieving, but something smaller and more honest. "Tell me about her," she had said. "If you want to, I'd like to hear." And I had talked. For the first time in 6 months, I had talked about Eleanor, not about her death, not about the diagnosis or the hospital or the terrible efficiency of the final weeks, but about her. The way she annotated her books in 3 different colors of ink. The way she could walk into any room and immediately identify the most interesting person in it. The way she had built Hale Foundation from a dinner table idea into something that had put 400 kids through college. Vanessa had listened to every word. She had not looked at her phone once. I drove home that afternoon feeling something I had not felt in 6 months. Not happiness, nothing so large as that. Just the faint, tentative sensation of being slightly less alone. Now I sat in Eleanor's chair and pressed my thumb hard against the rim of my coffee mug until it hurt, and I made myself look at that memory differently. Made myself ask the question I had been too comfortable to ask before. Had Vanessa asked about Eleanor because she genuinely wanted to know, or because Ethan had told her exactly what to say to reach me? The thought made my stomach turn over. Then another memory surfaced, one I had not thought about in years. Ethan, 12 years old, standing in the hallway outside the boys' bedroom. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Adrian had twisted his ankle badly at soccer practice. Eleanor was inside, with Adrian sitting on the edge of his bed, her hand on his knee talking him through it. I had passed the doorway and kept walking. What I had not seen, what Edith had told me years later offhand, as if it was not important, was that Ethan had stood in that hallway for a long time, watching his mother tend to his brother, not going in, not calling out, just watching. I had filed that story away as nothing. Children get jealous. It passes. Sitting in Eleanor's chair at 6:30 in the morning, I understood for the first time that for some people, it does not pass. It calcifies. It becomes the story they tell themselves about who got what and who deserved more, and who the world always chose over them. I should have seen it. I told Eleanor's photograph, and my voice broke on the last word, cracked right down the middle, spilling out something raw and unguarded that I was too tired to hold back. God help me, Eleanor. I should have seen so much more than I did. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Vanessa was awake. I straightened in the chair, tightened my hands around the mug, and arranged my face into something that looked like a man who had simply woken up early. I had played a lot of roles in 68 years. I could play one more. Footsteps on the stairs, the soft sound of the refrigerator opening in the kitchen. Then Vanessa appeared in the doorway holding her own coffee, dressed already, hair neatly done, wearing a smile so warm and practiced that it made my back teeth ache. "Morning," she said. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Old man problems." She tilted her head, studying me with those careful eyes. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" "Fine." I took a sip of coffee. "Just fine." She crossed to the window and looked out at the garden, and I watched the back of her head and thought you were out there last night. You knew they were coming. You had already done your part. And I smiled at her when she turned around and I said, "Have you eaten? I could make eggs." And she said, "I'll make them. You sit." And I let her walk back into my kitchen and cook breakfast in my house, and I kept smiling until my face hurt. That included leaving the backdoor code unchanged, the same 4 digits, the same entry point Ethan had used 2 nights ago. If I changed it now, he would know something had shifted, and I could not afford for him to know that. Not yet. She made eggs the way she made everything perfectly. 2 eggs over easy toast, cut on the diagonal orange juice, poured to exactly 3/4 of the glass, the way I had mentioned once 7 months ago, that I preferred it. She remembered details like that. She always had. At the time, I had found it touching. Now, watching her move around my kitchen with that quiet, practiced ease, opening the right cabinet without looking, knowing exactly where the spatula lived, reaching past the good plates to the everyday ones, without a moment's hesitation, I felt something cold settle at the base of my spine. She knew this kitchen better than some people know their own homes. "Here you go." She set the plate in front of me and reached past me to the small ceramic dish she kept on the counter beside the coffee maker, white with a blue rim, something she had brought from her own apartment when she moved in. She tipped 3 pills into the dish and slid it toward me. "Don't forget these. 2 white, 1 yellow. Vitamins, she called them. Supplements for a man, my age, something. For the joints, something for the heart, something for general wellness." She had introduced them gradually, starting about 4 months after we married, and I had taken them without question, the way a man takes things from a woman he trusts. This morning, I looked at those 3 pills and felt my stomach drop. "Thank you," I said. I picked up the white pills and held them in my palm, small, innocuous, the kind of thing you could take every day for a year without thinking twice. Vanessa sat down across from me with her coffee crossed her legs and opened her phone, checking the news. Perfectly normal. I put the pills on my tongue, raised the orange juice glass, took a long swallow, and held the pills against the inside of my lower lip. She did not look up. I set the glass down, waited 4 seconds. Then I picked up my fork, and while she scrolled her phone, I pressed the pills beneath my tongue and turned slightly toward the window, as if looking at something in the garden. I worked them loose with my tongue and tucked them into my cheek. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, still reading her screen. "A little," I said. My voice came out steady, steadier than I felt. "Not my best night. You should talk to Dr. Crane about that." She glanced up and her eyes were soft with what looked exactly like concern. "Insomnia at your age can really wear you down, Richard. I worry about you. Dr. Sylvia Crane. Ethan had recommended her 8 months ago, a geriatric specialist. He had said someone who understood the particular challenges of men in their late 60s. I had gone twice. She had asked careful questions and made careful notes, and sent careful letters to Ethan, copied to me, that used words like monitoring and proactive management. It had all felt very responsible. "I'm fine," I said. "Just a restless night." I ate 2 bites of eggs, excused myself to the bathroom, and stood over the sink. I opened my mouth and let 3 pills drop into my palm. I stared at them for a long moment, 2, white, 1 yellow, smooth and small, and completely unremarkable. Then I opened the cabinet under the sink, found an old travel-sized toothpaste tube that had been pushed to the very back, and pressed the pills carefully into the cap. I straightened up, looked at my own face in the mirror, and felt something harden in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a cold and deliberate resolve, the kind that comes when a man decides he is finished being moved around without his knowledge. "All right," I said quietly to my own reflection. "Let's see what you've been giving me." Back in the kitchen, I finished my eggs and let Vanessa refill my coffee, and accepted her suggestion that I rest on the porch for a while because the morning air would do me good. I sat in the porch chair and watched the garden, and tried to organize what I knew against what I suspected. What I knew Ethan had been in my house last night. He had taken documents. He had said Vanessa had done her part. What I suspected, the fogginess I had been feeling for months, the way my thoughts moved slowly some mornings, the way I had started second-guessing my own memory, was not old age. It was those pills. What I did not know how far any of this went, how long it had been planned, what the endgame was. Then I remembered the cameras. 3 months ago, a man had come to the house. Ethan had introduced him as a home security consultant, someone to help upgrade the system, make things safer for a man living with a younger wife in a house with more square footage than he strictly needed. The man had spent half a day working through the ground floor, and when he was finished, small cameras sat at the front entrance in the hallway and in the corner of the living room ceiling. "It's just for peace of mind, Dad," Ethan had said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "So I don't have to worry about you when I'm not here." I had thanked him. I looked up at the small camera mounted above the living room window, visible from my porch chair through the glass. Its red indicator light blinked once every few seconds. Slow, patient, steady. Somewhere someone was watching that feed. My hands tightened on the armrests of the porch chair until my knuckles went white. Every morning for 3 months, I had sat in this house and drunk my coffee and swallowed my pills and moved through my days while that little red light blinked above me, and I had called it safety. "You foolish old man," I whispered to myself, and the words tasted like rust. Then I got up, went back inside, and walked to my study. I opened the filing cabinet still with that single empty drawer from last night and began looking through what remained. The deed was gone, the foundation papers were gone. But in the very back of the bottom drawer, behind a folder of old tax returns that nobody would bother to take, I found something I had forgotten was there. A blue folder, thick, labeled in Ethan's handwriting, not mine. I opened it. The top page was a formal legal document printed on letterhead I did not recognize. The title, centered and bolded at the top of the page, read, "In the matter of Richard James Hale, petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate. My name, my address." My date of birth printed in clean black type, as though it belonged to a case file rather than a life. The words blurred slightly at the edges. I blinked hard, forced them back into focus, and read the first paragraph. It stated that I showed signs of cognitive decline, that I was no longer capable of managing my personal affairs, that I posed a risk to myself and to the financial assets in my care. It stated that the appropriate person to assume guardianship was my son, Ethan Douglas Hale. I sat down in my desk chair very slowly, as if my legs had made a quiet decision to stop cooperating. The folder sat open in my hands, and I read it through twice from the first line to the last. And when I finished, I set it on the desk with the same careful precision of a man handling something he does not want to drop. My eyes were burning. My throat had gone completely tight. "He's going to take everything," I said to the empty study. My voice came out barely above a breath, thin as paper. "He's going to take this house. He's going to take the foundation. He's going to take everything your mother and I spent 50 years building." I pressed my fist against my mouth hard. Then I picked up the folder, put it back exactly where I had found it, pushed the drawer closed, and straightened my desk chair. If Ethan wanted me to not know what was happening, then I would not know. I would be the confused, forgetful old man he needed me to be, until I understood enough to be something else entirely. I stood at my desk for a long time after I closed that drawer. The morning light came through the study blinds in thin, pale strips cutting across the empty filing cabinet across the desktop, where Eleanor's reading glasses still sat in a case I had never moved. 51 years of building something together, and it had taken Ethan one midnight visit to strip the paper evidence of it right out of the room. My hands would not stop trembling. I picked up my phone and called Adrian. 3 rings, 4, then the automated voice. "The person you are calling is unavailable. Please leave a message after the tone." "Adrian." My voice came out tight, like something wound too many times. "Call me back. It's important. Don't call the house line. Call my cell." I paused. "Please, son." I hung up and stood there holding the phone against my chest. He did not call back. I tried again at 11. Same result. I sent a text at noon, "Call me when you can. Urgent." And watched the screen for 20 minutes without a reply. The message sat there with a single gray check mark, undelivered, which meant his phone was either off or out of range. That was when Ethan arrived. He came through the front door without knocking. He had a key, had always had a key, and before last night that had seemed like the most natural thing in the world. He walked into the kitchen, where I was sitting with a cup of cold coffee, and dropped into the chair across from me with the easy confidence of a man who believed himself welcome everywhere he went. "Morning, Dad." He reached over and squeezed my forearm. "You look tired. Didn't sleep." "Getting old," I said. I made myself smile. It felt like lifting something heavy. "You know how it is. You should mention that to Dr. Crane." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling with one thumb. "Sleep disruption at your age is worth taking seriously. I can ask her to add it to your file." "That's thoughtful of you," I said. Every word came out smooth, practiced. I was getting better at this faster than I expected, and I was not sure whether to be proud of that or frightened. "Have you talked to Adrian lately? I've been trying to reach him." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, barely visible, a slight tightening around the eyes there, and gone in under a second. "Adrian's deep in an operation right now, Dad. You know how he gets when he's working, goes dark for weeks." "Of course." I nodded slowly. I just wanted to hear his voice. "I'll try to get a message to him," Ethan said, already looking back at his phone. "Don't worry about it." The casual dismissal of it, "Don't worry about it," landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. He had just told me not to look for the one person who had called to warn me, and he had said it with the same tone he used to talk about the weather. After Ethan left, I went out to the garden. The afternoon had turned cool, the sky the particular flat gray of a Connecticut September that can't decide between summer and fall. I was deadheading Eleanor's roses along the back fence. She had planted them the year we bought this house, and I maintained them badly but faithfully when I heard the familiar voice from the other side of the fence. Richard. Gloria Whitman, 70 years old and sharp as a tack, stood at the fence line in her garden coat, a small spiral notebook clutched to her chest. She had lived next door for 23 years. She had brought us soup when Eleanor was in treatment, and pie when Eleanor passed, and she watched everything that happened on Birchwood Lane with the quiet, comprehensive attention of a woman who had nowhere more important to be. I wasn't going to say anything. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. I straightened up from the rosebed. Gloria, what is it? That car. She lowered her voice, leaning slightly over the fence post. The dark one, no headlights. Her eyes were serious in a way that made my throat tighten. It's come 3 times now, always after 11, always parks along your service lane and leaves within the hour. First time, I thought I'd imagined it. Second time, I wrote it down. She held up the notebook. Third time, I got up and took a photograph of the license plate from my bedroom window. My heart knocked hard inside my chest. I stepped closer to the fence. Gloria, I know it's probably nothing. She was already tearing a page out of the notebook, the soft rip of spiral paper cutting through the quiet afternoon. But your Eleanor always said that the things that feel like nothing are usually something, and I thought if she were still here, she'd want someone to tell you. Her voice softened on Eleanor's name just slightly. So, I'm telling you. She pressed the folded paper into my hand. I looked down at it. A license plate number written in careful block letters with 3 dates and times listed beneath it. The most recent date was last night, 12:22 in the morning, 12:22, 9 minutes after Adrian called me. My eyes burned so badly I had to turn away for a moment, pretending to look at the roses. I pressed my back teeth together hard and breathed through my nose until the burning passed. Thank you, I said when I trusted my voice again. I turned back and met Gloria's eyes. Thank you, Gloria. This helps more than you know. She reached over the fence and patted my hand, once the way people do when they want to say something they don't have the right words for. You take care of yourself, she said quietly. Eleanor would want that. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket close against my chest. I was still standing at the fence when my phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from a number I did not recognize. 7 words, no punctuation, no signature check. The back of the medicine cabinet, I read it twice. Then I walked inside, went upstairs to the bathroom, and opened the medicine cabinet. Behind my shaving kit, pushed to the very back corner, was a small folded piece of paper I had never put there. I unfolded it. Aunt Margaret's tomorrow. Bring the pills. Tell no one. My legs went completely unsteady beneath me. I grabbed the edge of the sink with both hands and held on. He was watching. He had been watching this whole time. And just then, from downstairs, I heard Vanessa call up the staircase. Richard Ethan's on the phone. He wants to know if you're free Thursday evening. Dr. Crane would like to stop by for a quick check-in. I looked at my own reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror, gray-faced eyes red at the rims, hands white-knuckled on the porcelain sink. Tell him Thursday works perfectly, I called back. My voice came out warm and easy and entirely convincing. I was learning to lie to my own family, and I hated how natural it felt. I told Vanessa I needed to drive to the pharmacy in Stamford. It was not entirely a lie. There was a pharmacy on the same street as Margaret's house, and I did pull into its parking lot for 4 minutes before continuing 2 blocks down and parking in front of a pale yellow colonial with a flower box under every window. Margaret Bennett had lived in that house for 15 years. Eleanor used to call it the cheerful house, because no matter what season it was, Margaret always had something blooming. I rang the bell, and Margaret opened the door before the chime had finished. She was 64 years old with Eleanor's same dark eyes and a short silver bob that she had worn for as long as I could remember. She was smaller than her sister, had been more compact with the precise and unhurried movements of someone who had spent 20 years as a floor nurse and never quite left that version of herself behind. She took one look at my face, and her expression shifted not to alarm, but to something quieter and more serious. Richard, she pushed the door open wider. Come in, you look terrible. I know, I said. My throat was tight before I even crossed the threshold. She brought me to the kitchen. Yellow Wall's herbs growing in clay pots on the windowsill, the smell of coffee already brewed. It was so much like Eleanor's idea of what a kitchen should look like that I had to press my lips together hard and stare at the ceiling for a moment before I could sit down. Talk, Margaret said, setting a mug in front of me. So I talked. I told her everything. The call from Adrian, the shed, Ethan and the man with the duffel bag, the documents, the 5 words I had heard through the crack in the planks, a guardianship petition in my own filing cabinet with my own name typed across the top, the pills Vanessa gave me every morning that I had now been hiding for 3 days, Gloria's notebook, the message Adrian had left in the medicine cabinet. Margaret sat across from me the entire time without touching her coffee. Her hands were flat on the table, and her eyes never left my face, and she listened the way Eleanor used to listen, completely without performing it, as if what I was saying was the only thing in the world that mattered right now. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bird hit a high note and held it. "The pills," Margaret said. "You brought them." I reached into my jacket pocket and set the old toothpaste cap on the table between us. She picked it up, opened it, and poured the small pills into her palm, 2 white, 1 yellow. She held them close, turned them, looked at the markings on the surface. Then she lifted one and held it near her nose. "Margaret," I started. "I'm not diagnosing anything," she said firmly without looking up. "I'm a retired nurse, not a pharmacist. But I spent 20 years identifying medications by sight and smell because patients came in all the time not knowing what they'd taken." She set the pills back in the cap. "These 2 white ones, I'd want them tested. The coding and the scoring marks don't match any standard multivitamin I've ever seen. The yellow one I'm less certain about, but the color is off for a B complex." My hand resting on the table had started to shake. I pressed it flat and held it there. If someone were giving a person low doses of a sedative compound over a long period of time, I said slowly, "What would that look like?" Margaret looked at me steadily. "It would look like getting old," she said. "Foggy thinking, trouble concentrating, forgetting things you'd normally remember, hands trembling occasionally." She paused. "Doubting yourself." The air went out of me like a punctured tire. "Eleanor's sister called me a paranoid old man 6 months ago," I said, and my voice broke halfway through the sentence, cracking open and spilling something raw and humiliated that I had been holding down for months. I called myself that. I said to myself, "Richard, you're 68 years old, and you're grieving, and this is just what it feels like to be—" "Stop!" Margaret reached across the table and gripped my hand hard, not gently, not consolingly, but with the firm grip of someone who needs you to hear them. "Stop that! Listen to me. You are one of the sharpest men I have known for 30 years. Eleanor always said that. She said the day Richard Hale starts missing things is the day I check myself into a hospital." Her voice wavered slightly on Eleanor's name, and she steadied it. "This is not you falling apart. This is something being done to you. There is a difference, and you need to know it." My eyes burned. I turned my head toward the window and blinked hard once, twice, until the burning receded to something manageable. "I'm going to call a friend at the hospital lab," Margaret said, releasing my hand and reaching for her phone. "She can run these quietly and have results by tomorrow morning. No names on the paperwork." She was already dialing. "While I do that, I want you to write down every symptom you remember with approximate dates. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, I can do that." She stepped into the hallway to make the call. I sat in her yellow kitchen with Eleanor's handwriting on the herb pot labels Margaret had kept them from a gift Eleanor made years ago, and I pressed my knuckles against my mouth and breathed carefully through my nose and tried very hard not to come apart at the seams. I was mostly successful. Margaret came back 10 minutes later, phone tucked away expression composed in the particular way of medical professionals who have trained themselves to appear calm so their patients can be calm too. "Tomorrow morning," she confirmed. "I'll call you on the number Adrian left, not your regular cell." She sat back down and wrapped both hands around her mug. "Richard, who else knows about this?" "Adrian," I said. "Gloria Whitman partially, she knows something is wrong. She doesn't know the scope of it. Is there anyone else you trust completely?" I thought about it. "Arthur Wells," I said. "Eleanor's attorney. He's held her trust documents for years." I hesitated. "I think she left something with him. Something she wanted me to have if things went wrong." Margaret studied me across the table for a long moment. "Then you should go see Arthur," she said quietly. "Soon." I nodded. I picked up my coffee mug and took a long swallow, even though it had gone cold because I needed something to do with my hands. I drove home in time for dinner. Vanessa had made chicken and roasted vegetables, and the kitchen smelled warm and good, and she smiled when I walked in and said, "Perfect timing," and I kissed her on the cheek and said the food smelled wonderful. She turned back to the stove, and I stood behind her and felt something cold and ancient move through me, the particular grief of a man who has just realized that nothing in the room he is standing in is what it appears to be. That evening, Ethan arrived without warning. He walked through the door with a woman I had never seen before, 50-something neat gray suit leather portfolio under one arm, the careful professional smile of someone who is used to being in rooms where she is not entirely welcome. "Dad?" Ethan put a hand on my shoulder. "This is Dr. Sylvia Crane. You've spoken on the phone. I asked her to stop by in person. Just a quick informal check-in. Nothing to worry about." Dr. Crane extended her hand. "Mr. Hale, it's so good to finally meet you properly. I just have a few questions if you don't mind." She was already opening her portfolio. I drove back from Stamford before 4 o'clock and walked into my own house, still carrying the cold air of Margaret's kitchen in my chest. Dr. Sylvia Crane had the kind of face that was designed to put people at ease. Soft eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a voice calibrated to the precise frequency of reassurance hands that moved through papers with the unhurried confidence of someone who had conducted this particular performance many times before. She settled into the armchair across from me, as though she had sat in it 100 times, crossed her ankles, and smiled. "Mr. Hale, I just want to have a conversation," she said. "Nothing formal, nothing scary. I do these check-ins all the time with gentlemen in your age group." Gentlemen in your age group. I kept my face open and mild and thought you rehearsed that phrase. "Of course," I said pleasantly. "Whatever helps." Ethan sat in the corner of the sofa, with his phone face down on his knee, watching me with an expression of practiced concern that made my back teeth grind. Vanessa stood near the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands that she had stopped pretending to use. Dr. Crane opened her portfolio and clicked her pen. "Let's start simple. Can you tell me today's date?" "September 19th, I said. "Thursday." She wrote something. "And the year 2024. She wrote again. I watched her pen move and thought, "What are you writing?" I answered correctly. "What is there to write?" "Wonderful." She looked up with that warm smile. "Now, I'd like to show you a few images and have you name what you see." She held up a laminated card, a drawing of a clock. I named it. A drawing of a house, a dog, a pair of glasses. I named everyone without hesitation. My voice stayed even. My hands stayed still in my lap through sheer force of will because they wanted very badly to shake, not from confusion but from rage. "Excellent." She made another note. Then she tilted her head slightly in the way of someone about to say something delicate. "I'm noticing a slight hesitation in some of your responses, Mr. Hale. A small delay between the prompt and your answer. That's something worth documenting." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my ears. A hesitation. I had answered within 2 seconds every single time. "He forgot his own birthday last month." Ethan offered from the sofa, his voice gentle and deeply infuriatingly convincing. "He told me he thought it was in August. It's in July." I turned to look at my son. I said I didn't feel like celebrating Ethan. I didn't say I didn't know when it was. Something flickered across Ethan's face, too fast to name there, and gone, and he nodded slowly. "Of course, Dad. I just want to make sure Dr. Crane has the full picture." The full picture. The words sat in my stomach like something spoiled. Dr. Crane closed her portfolio 20 minutes later and shook my hand with both of hers. "Mr. Hale, you've been very cooperative. I'll have my written assessment to Ethan within the week." She held my hand a beat too long. "Please don't worry. My only concern is your well-being." After they left Ethan walking Dr. Crane to her car, Vanessa disappearing upstairs, I stood at the living room window and watched the taillights of her sedan pull out of the driveway. "My well-being," I said aloud to the dark window glass. My voice came out raw at the edges scraped thin by an evening of performing calm I did not feel. Right. The following morning, I drove to see Edith Monroe. Edith had been our housekeeper for 14 years, before she retired 2 years ago at 67. She lived in a small ranch house in Cos Cob, about 12 minutes from Birchwood Lane, and when I knocked on her door at 9 in the morning, she opened it immediately as if she had been expecting me. "Mr. Hale?" She was a compact, white-haired woman, with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead. She stepped back from the door and said, "I wondered when you'd come." That stopped me cold on her front step. "You wondered?" "Come in," she said simply. "I'll make tea." Her living room had the particular neatness of someone who lives alone and maintains order as a form of comfort. She brought 2 cups of tea and sat across from me and folded her hands in her lap. "What did you want to tell me, Edith?" I asked. She took a long breath. "About 2 months before Mrs. Hale passed," she said carefully, "I saw Mr. Ethan in her room. Late afternoon, Mrs. Hale was asleep. She slept a lot by that point. He was going through the nightstand drawer and the small filing cabinet she kept by the window. My cup stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it back down. I asked him what he was looking for. Edith continued, her voice steady, but her hands pressing harder together in her lap. He said he was finding her insurance papers, that he wanted to help organize things. She paused. But Mr. Hale, the insurance papers were in the kitchen cabinet. Mrs. Hale had always kept them there. I organized that cabinet myself every year. Her eyes met mine and held them. What he was carrying when he left her room was not insurance papers. It was a green folder, legal-sized, the kind Mrs. Hale used for foundation documents. The blood drained from my face so fast the room tilted slightly. "I should have told you then," Edith said, and her voice broke on the last word, cracking open with a guilt she had clearly been carrying for the better part of 2 years. I kept telling myself it was family business, it wasn't my place, but she was so good to me, Mr. Hale. Mrs. Hale was the kindest employer I ever had, and I just... Edith! I leaned forward and covered her folded hands with mine. My throat was burning. You couldn't have known. None of us knew the full shape of it. She pressed her lips together hard and nodded, blinking rapidly. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, my knuckles aching, a white-hot clarity burning through my chest. That was something between fury and grief and a love for Eleanor so acute it felt like a wound. She had been dying. She had been sleeping in her own bed while her son went through her files, and she had still somehow, in whatever time she had left, found a way to protect us. My phone buzzed at a red light. Unknown number, a single line. Check the Foundation's Q3 report. Look at the transfer entries. A one letter. My son. He had been watching this whole time, every single day. I drove home with Adrian's message burning a hole through my shirt pocket. Check the Foundation's Q3 report. Look at the transfer entries. The Foundation. Hale Foundation. Eleanor's real child, as she used to call it. 22 years of building something that outlasted careers and market downturns, and one very bad year in 2008 that almost broke us. The Foundation had survived all of it because Eleanor had run it with the same combination of warmth and absolute precision she brought to everything she touched. I waited until Vanessa went upstairs to shower. Then I went to the study, opened my laptop, and logged into the Foundation's board portal. The Q3 report was 40 pages. I went straight to the transfer ledger. 3 entries stopped me cold. The first, a transfer of $180,000 to a company called HVR Consulting LLC, dated August 15th, categorized as Strategic Advisory Services. I had never heard of HVR Consulting. I had never authorized that payment. The second, $120,000 to Bridgeport Property Advisors, dated September 2nd. Same category, same result. No memory of approving it, no corresponding project in the Foundation's activity log. The third entry made my stomach drop completely. $75,000 to Atlantic Horizon. Partners, dated September 10th, 9 days ago. The authorization signature on the digital form read R. Hale Board Chair. My signature, except I had not signed anything in 6 weeks. "That's not my approval," I said aloud to the empty study, my voice sharp and tight. That is not my signature." I pushed back from the desk, pressed my hands flat on my thighs, and made myself breathe slowly. Daniel Cross. The man who had walked out of my house with a duffel bag full of documents. A man Ethan had introduced as a security consultant, but who moved like someone whose actual skill set was considerably less legitimate. He had the Foundation's corporate filings now, and apparently he also had a convincing copy of my handwriting. Then a memory surfaced, something Eleanor had said at dinner in November 2022, 3 months before her diagnosis. In the offhand way, she mentioned things that were actually important. Ethan asked me to sign some Foundation papers last week. I told him to talk to Arthur. I had nodded and passed the bread and thought nothing of it. She had told Arthur, not me, Arthur. I opened my email and searched for Arthur Wells in the archive. There was a message from him dated 8 months ago. Subject line, no action. Required at this time, FYI only. I had filed it unread because the subject line told me to. I opened it now. It was 2 paragraphs. The first explained that Eleanor had worked with Arthur to establish an irrevocable trust 6 months before her death, naming Adrian as the trustee responsible for overseeing Foundation operations. The second paragraph contained one sentence that made the breath leave my body entirely. Mrs. Hale cited concerns about a pattern of financial decision-making by Ethan Hale and asked that this arrangement be kept confidential until such time as it became necessary to act upon. I read it 3 times. My eyes were burning so badly I could barely see the screen. "She knew," I whispered. The words tore out of me rough and broken, the way words come when they have been held in too long. "Eleanor, you knew the whole time, and you went through all of that alone." My throat closed completely. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and held it there hard until the worst of it passed. The following morning, a plain white envelope had been pushed under the study door. No stamp, no return address. Inside a single folded page in handwriting, I recognized the way you recognize a voice in the dark immediately without having to think. Dad. 7 months undercover tracking Ethan's companies with Ryan Mercer's Financial Crimes Unit. I can't call. They have a shadow application on your phone that mirrors every call and text. Noah is safe and knows I'm okay. Do not react to anything unusual. I'm close. Trust Arthur Wells completely. My legs buckled. I sat down on the floor of my study with my back against the desk, the letter in both hands, and for the first time since that midnight phone call, I let myself feel the full weight of what had been happening. 7 months. My son had been working this case for 7 months, cut off from me, watching me from a distance, unable to say a single word. And I had believed Ethan when he said Adrian didn't care. The shame of that hit me like a physical blow square in the chest, leaving me winded and hollowed out. "I'm sorry," I said aloud to the empty room, to the son who wasn't there. "Adrian, I am so sorry." I sat on the floor for a long moment. Then I stood, folded the letter, and burned it over the study trash can with a lighter I found in the desk drawer. I watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash, and I made a promise to myself I was done being moved around this board without knowing the game. I straightened up, looked at the camera in the corner of the study ceiling, the one I had only noticed 2 days ago, the one Daniel Cross had installed without telling me, and smiled pleasantly at it the way a confused old man might smile at a smoke detector he had just noticed. Let Ethan watch. Let him see exactly what he expected to see, because what he could not see was what was already in motion. 3 days after I burned Adrian's letter in the study trash can, someone rang the front doorbell at 2 in the afternoon. Vanessa was out. She had mentioned something about a salon appointment, had kissed me on the cheek with that warm, practiced smile, and driven away at noon. I had spent the past 3 hours sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper, while actually going through every foundation document I still had access to, cross-referencing dates and names, until my eyes ached. I opened the front door, and felt the ground shift slightly beneath my feet. The woman standing on my porch was 36 years old, with dark circles under her eyes, and the particular set of jaw that belongs to people who have made a difficult decision and are not going to unmake it. I recognized her from a photograph, a single photograph Eleanor had kept in her bedside drawer, without ever explaining why a wedding photo from a marriage that had lasted 3 years and ended badly. Ethan's ex-wife, Mr. Hale. Her voice was steady, but her hands were gripping her purse strap hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "I know I should have called. I wasn't sure you'd let me in if I did." I stepped back from the door. "Come in, Olivia." She exhaled a long, shaky breath, like someone who had been holding it since the parking lot. "Thank you." I brought her to the kitchen. She sat across from me and set her purse on the table and looked at me with those tired, clear eyes. "Well, why are you here?" I asked, not unkindly, but directly because I was past the point of circling things. "Because Ethan sent me a letter last week." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document, slid it across the table toward me. "His attorney is claiming I violated a non-disparagement clause in our divorce settlement. He's demanding the return of $60,000 from the financial agreement." Her mouth tightened. "That clause was boilerplate. I haven't said a word about him publicly in 3 years. But Ethan only does things for one reason. Mr. Hale, and that reason is always about clearing the board before a big move." My chest went cold and tight. "He's covering his tracks. He's covering everything." She leaned forward, both hands flat on the table, her voice dropping lower and sharper. "I came because I know what he does before he takes something. I watched him do it during our marriage. He gets very organized, very efficient, very kind to everyone in the room, right up until the moment he isn't." Her eyes were fierce and wet at the rims. I'm not going to sit in my house and wait while he does the same thing to you that he did to your wife. The air went out of my lungs. Eleanor, Olivia's jaw worked for a moment. 2 years into our marriage, I found a document in Ethan's desk, a loan agreement for $75,000 drawn against the foundation's operating fund. She pressed her lips together hard. The signature on it was Eleanor's, but the handwriting I had seen Eleanor sign things at family dinners, at foundation events. That signature was not hers. My hand resting on the table began to tremble. I pressed it flat and held it there with every ounce of control I had left. I confronted him. Olivia continued, her voice cracking slightly on the word confronted, like even the memory of it still cost her something. He said it was a clerical error, an administrative mix-up. He was so calm, Mr. Hale, so completely calm. And then Eleanor called him the next day. She had found out somehow. She always found out. And I heard his half of that conversation through the kitchen door, and I thought, she is going to destroy him. Olivia shook her head slowly. But she didn't. She told me later she couldn't do it to the family. She just changed every lock on every document cabinet she owned and never gave him access again. My throat had closed completely. I was staring at the surface of the kitchen table, at the grain of the wood that Eleanor had chosen at a showroom in Stamford 20 years ago. And I was thinking she carried that alone. For years she carried that, and she never once. The back door opened. I spun around in my chair, heart slamming. A 16-year-old boy stepped into my kitchen, wearing a gray hoodie and a backpack baseball cap, turned backward, a can of Coke already in one hand. He stopped when he saw Olivia, glanced at her, then looked at me with his father's eyes set into his mother's face. "Hey, Grandpa." Noah Hale, my grandson. Adrian's son dropped his backpack on the floor with a thud that rattled the herb pots on the windowsill. "Dad said to check in on you. Hope that's okay. I let myself in through the back. The code's the same as always." My heart cracked open with relief so sudden and fierce it felt almost like pain. "Noah." My voice came out rough and thick. Yeah, it's okay. Come sit down." He pulled out the chair beside me, flipped it around, and sat on it backwards the way teenagers do, arms crossed over the top. He looked at Olivia with the direct, uncomplicated curiosity of someone too young to have learned to pretend he wasn't looking. "I'm Olivia," she said. "I know who you are," Noah said simply. Then he pulled out a battered laptop from his backpack and set it on the table, already opening it. "Grandpa, I'm going to borrow your Wi-Fi. Mine's slow at home." "Of course," I said. He was typing within 30 seconds fast, practiced barely looking at the keyboard. Olivia caught my eye across the table, and I could see she was deciding whether to keep talking with him in the room. I gave her a small nod. She leaned forward again. "The reason I'm telling you all of this," she said quietly, "is that Ethan is not new at this. He did not suddenly become this person. He has always been this person, and the only thing that ever stopped him before was Eleanor. And Eleanor is—" Her voice broke. She pulled in a sharp breath and steadied herself. "She's not here anymore, so someone else has to be." Noah looked up from his laptop, not at Olivia, at me. His face was calm and serious in a way that made him look suddenly much older than 16. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Your router is broadcasting on 2 separate frequencies. That's not normal for a home setup." He turned the laptop so I could see the screen, a network diagnostics display, columns of data I could not fully read. "Someone installed a secondary device on your network. It's mirroring your camera feeds and sending everything to an external IP address." The kitchen went very quiet. Olivia sat up straight. Her face had gone pale. I looked at my grandson, this boy who had walked into my kitchen with a Coke and a backpack and somehow just confirmed what I had feared since the night I found the camera in the study ceiling, and I felt a surge of something so strong it nearly leveled me. Pride and terror and gratitude so sharp it cut. "Can you find out whose IP address?" I asked. My voice was steady. I had learned in the past week to keep my voice very steady. Noah was already typing. "Way ahead of you," he said. Noah worked for 40 minutes without looking up once. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and watched his fingers move across the keyboard with the fluid, unhesitating certainty of someone whose native language happened to be written in code. Olivia had left. 20 minutes earlier, she had squeezed my hand at the door, said, "I'm sorry it took me this long." and walked to her car with her shoulders pulled back and her chin up, the posture of someone who has finally put down a weight they had been carrying for years. I had stood at the door and watched her go and thought Eleanor would have liked her. She always said Ethan had married the right woman and then driven her away. Got it. Noah sat up straight and turned the laptop toward me. The external IP address belongs to a registered business, Cross Digital Solutions, LLC, registered in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The name hit me like a fist to the sternum. Daniel Cross, I said. Noah's eyes sharpened. You know that name? He came to this house 3 months ago, I said, carefully aware of the camera blinking in the living room corner, keeping my voice level and conversational, the way a man with nothing to hide speaks. Ethan introduced him as a home security consultant. Noah looked at me for one long, measured moment, his father's eyes in a 16-year-old face, and then he looked back at the screen. He's been pulling your camera feeds every 8 hours, he said, live and recorded. Whoever has access to that IP can see everything that's happened in this house since those cameras went up. He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I can kill the transmission, cut him off, but if I do, that whoever's watching will know the feed went dark. Don't touch it, I said immediately. Leave everything exactly as it is. Noah nodded slowly. Smart, he said, and the simple word landed with more weight than he probably intended. He pulled a thumb drive from his backpack pocket and plugged it into the side of his laptop. I'm going to copy the full archive of everything that's been sent out, every clip, every timestamp. Can you give me 40 minutes? Take as long as you need, I said. The following morning, I drove to Norwalk alone. The cafe was on Washington Street, small, independent, the kind of place that stayed deliberately unglamorous, mismatched chairs, good coffee tables, far enough apart that a conversation could be private. I had gotten the address from Noah, who had gotten it from a message routed through Adrian's contact. Lucas Perry was already there when I arrived. 31 years old, sandy hair, the slightly hollowed look of someone who had not been sleeping well since losing a job he had not expected to lose. He was nursing a black coffee and had a laptop bag under his chair. He stood when he saw me, a reflex of professional courtesy that surprised me given everything. Mr. Hale, he extended his hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes were anxious, moving to the door and back. Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I sat down and lowered my voice. Adrian's contact told me you were let go from the foundation last month. Can you tell me what happened? Lucas wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. I was doing routine server maintenance 6 weeks ago, he said. Part of my job was archiving old email threads. Anything older than 3 years gets compressed and stored. But I found a folder that had been manually deleted from the server, not just archived. Someone had gone in and wiped it. His jaw tightened. When I started to look at what had been deleted, I got called into Monica Vance's office the next morning and handed a termination letter. Monica Vance. The Foundation's executive director, a position Eleanor had appointed her to 7 years ago, because she was brilliant and organized and completely trustworthy. Or, so we had all believed. My hands tightened around my own coffee cup until the ceramic bit into my palms. What was in the deleted folder? Lucas reached into his laptop bag and set a thumb drive on the table between us. Small, black, unremarkable. Emails between Ethan Hale and Monica Vance going back 14 months, he said. I recovered them before they cut my access. I've been sitting on them because I didn't know who to trust. He pushed the drive an inch closer toward me. I know who to trust now. I picked it up. My hand was trembling not from the pills I had stopped taking, but from something that felt very much like the ground finally solidifying beneath my feet after weeks of sinking. That evening, with Noah beside me and the thumb drive plugged into a laptop Adrian had instructed Noah to bring from his own home. Not mine, never mine, with those cameras watching. I read what Lucas Perry had recovered. The emails were methodical and cold the way planning always looks when it has been written down by people who believed they would never be caught. Ethan and Monica had set up 3 shell companies, LLCs registered in Connecticut, with no employees, no office space, no actual services provided. Under federal nonprofit law, a foundation like ours is legally prohibited from transferring funds to for-profit entities without documented services rendered. Every dollar that moved to HVR Consulting, Bridgeport Property Advisors, and Atlantic Horizon Partners was fraudulent on its face. But the email that made Noah set down his Coke and look at me with wide, alarmed eyes was dated 11 months ago. Ethan to Monica. Once the guardianship is formalized and trustee authority transfers from Adrian to me, we can move the endowment. Full amount. The offshore account is ready. The endowment. $4.2 million that Eleanor had built over 20 years. Donor by donor, event by event. Late night after late night at that kitchen table, with her reading glasses on and her calculator beside her. $4.2 million that Ethan intended to move offshore the moment he had control of my signature. Grandpa? Noah's voice was very quiet. Are you okay? I was staring at the screen and feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. Not grief, not confusion, not the foggy helplessness of the past several months. This was something older and clearer and considerably more dangerous. I'm better than okay, I said, and I meant it. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan, warm and cheerful and completely oblivious. Dad, Dr. Crane finished her evaluation report. We should sit down this week and talk about next steps. How's Wednesday? I typed back, Wednesday works perfectly, son. Looking forward to it. I set the phone down and looked at Noah, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might cautiously, carefully be described as the beginning of a plan. Arthur Wells called me on a Thursday morning. Not on my regular cell on the secondary number Noah had set up for me 2 days earlier, a prepaid phone that lived in my jacket pocket and that Vanessa had never seen. When it buzzed against my ribs at 8:45, I was standing at the kitchen sink pretending to wash a mug, and I turned on the faucet slightly louder before I answered. Richard? Arthur's voice was the same as it had been for 20 years, unhurried, precise, carrying the particular weight of a man who chose every word before he released it. I think it's time you came to see me. Today, if you can manage it. My grip on the mug tightened. I can manage it. Good. Come alone. Park on the street, not the lot. The lot has a camera that feeds to the building management system. A pause. Eleanor was very specific about that detail, actually. My throat went dry. She told you to tell me that? She told me to tell you many things, Arthur said quietly. I'll explain when you arrive. I told Vanessa I had a dental appointment in Hartford. She offered to drive me. I said I preferred the solitude of driving alone and watched something flicker briefly behind her eyes. Not suspicion exactly, but a small, careful recalibration. She smiled and said, "Of course," and handed me my jacket. Arthur's office was on Asylum Avenue, a detail that had always struck Eleanor as either ironic or appropriate depending on her mood. Third floor of a brick building that had been there since 1887, all dark wood paneling and bookshelves, and the deep settled smell of a place where serious things had been decided for a very long time. His secretary, a woman named Paulette, who had worked for him for 30 years, showed me in without a word and closed the door behind her. Arthur Wells was 71 years old, compact and silver-haired, with the kind of face that had learned to reveal only what it chose to. He stood when I entered and came around the desk to shake my hand. Both hands the way people do when a handshake needs to carry more than a handshake can hold. Richard? He studied my face for a moment. You look like you haven't slept in 2 weeks. 10 days, I said, give or take. He almost smiled. Sit down. He went to the credenza behind his desk, dark mahogany built into the wall, and opened the lower cabinet. What he set on the desk between us made my breath stop completely. A thick envelope sealed with dark wax the color of old burgundy. Written on the front in handwriting, I would have recognized in complete darkness in a dream at the bottom of the ocean. For Richard, to be opened when necessary. Eleanor's handwriting. My hands moved toward it before I had consciously decided to reach. I stopped myself, pressed my palms flat on my thighs. The burning behind my eyes was immediate and ferocious. And I was not going to cry in Arthur Wells' office. I was going to hold myself together for 10 more minutes. When did she give you this? My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped down to something barely above a whisper. 8 months before she passed, Arthur said. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the desk. She came in alone, didn't tell you she was coming, I assume, because you would have wanted to come with her. She said she had some concerns she needed to address legally without putting you in the position of knowing about them. His eyes were steady and warm and carrying something very close to grief. She was the most careful person I ever represented, Richard. She saw things coming that other people hadn't noticed were moving yet. I opened the envelope. Inside a letter in Eleanor's hand, 3 pages in a thick legal document, the trust instrument itself stamped and notarized. I read the letter first. My hands were shaking so hard by the second paragraph that the paper rattled faintly in the quiet office. "Richard," she had written, "if Arthur has given you this, then something has happened that I hoped would not happen but could not risk ignoring. I am sorry I didn't say this to your face. I tried twice, and both times I looked at you and thought he loves both his sons so completely. I couldn't take that from you before I had to. What I can tell you is this Ethan has been moving money he shouldn't have access to. He has been building something I don't fully understand, but I understand enough to know it is not built for you. I have tried to protect what we built together in the only way I know how, with paperwork, with Arthur. With a trust that says in language that cannot be argued away, this belongs to our family and no one person gets to take it. The trust names Adrian as trustee of the foundation. Not because I love him more, I want you to know that, but because he is the one who helped me find the discrepancies 2 years ago and said nothing to you because I asked him not to. He has been protecting you longer than you know. I love you, Richard. I have loved you since a faculty dinner in 1972, and I have not stopped for a single day since. Whatever comes, the house is yours. The foundation belongs to the work, and you belong to yourself. Trust Arthur, trust Adrian, and please take care of the roses." I folded the letter, set it on the desk, pressed both fists against my mouth so hard I felt my teeth through my lips. Arthur did not say anything. He understood with the wisdom of a man who had sat across from grief many times that some moments do not need words poured into them. When I could speak again, I said, "The trust. What does it say about Ethan?" Arthur turned the legal document and pointed to a highlighted clause. "If any party attempts to establish guardianship over you through fraudulent medical assessment or takes action to manipulate the disposition of foundation assets without the consent of the named trustee, that party forfeits all inheritance rights, all claims to foundation assets, and all authority within Hale family holdings." He met my eyes, effective immediately upon confirmation of the attempt. I stared at the clause, read it twice. Then I looked up at Arthur and said, "She built a trap." "She built a trap," he confirmed, designed so that the only way he could spring it was by walking straight into it himself. Something moved behind Arthur's eyes, respect, and something that looked very much like the particular sorrow of a man who had watched a remarkable woman work right up until the very end. She recorded everything meticulously, every discrepancy, every document she suspected had been altered. All of it is in the trust file, ready to be submitted to the court the moment it becomes necessary. I sat back in my chair. My chest felt hollowed out and full, at the same time emptied by grief and refilled by something I had not felt since the night in the shed. Not anger, not fear, certainty. "Arthur," I said, "Ethan is planning a guardianship hearing. He has a doctor's evaluation. He has forged documents. He is going to try to move very quickly." "I know." Arthur opened his desk drawer and set a second document on the table, which is why I've already prepared a petition for emergency injunction. The moment Ethan initiates a formal guardianship proceeding, we file this with the Superior Court. It freezes every asset transfer, every account, every foundation transaction before he can move a single dollar. He paused. "But Richard, for the injunction to land at the right moment, we need him to make his move first, fully, on the record." I understood exactly what he was saying. We needed to let Ethan believe he had won. "There's one more thing," Arthur said. "At the signing, if there is a signing, I need a signal from you. Something only you and I will understand to tell me the moment has come." He looked at me steadily. What would Eleanor do? The answer came to me immediately, clear and complete and so perfectly her that my eyes stung all over again. "I'll sign her name," I said, "instead of mine. She'll be in that room one way or another." Arthur held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded very slowly. I walked out of his office 40 minutes later, down the staircase and through the lobby, and out into the October afternoon. I turned toward the street where I had parked and stopped. Ethan was standing beside my car. He looked up when he saw me, and his face arranged itself into surprise that arrived exactly 1 second too late to be genuine. I understood in that moment that he had not stumbled onto this street by accident. Someone had been watching my movements, reporting back. The shadow app on my phone, or someone he had stationed nearby. Either way, the message was clear. He was closer than I had realized. Small world dad. His smile was warm and easy and did not reach his eyes. Didn't know you had appointments up here. Dental? I said pleasantly. You, client meeting. He nodded toward the building across the street. Everything all right? You look a little pale. Just the usual old man business, I said, and patted his arm and walked around to the driver's side of my car. I did not look back, but I felt his eyes on me all the way down the block. Before I reveal what Vanessa had been hiding this entire time, and trust me, this will change everything you thought you knew, drop the word truth in the comments. Let me know you're still here, because what comes next, you do not want to miss. Just so you know, some details in what follows have been shaped for clarity and reflection. If you'd rather not continue, you can close out right here, and I completely understand. I came home to a kitchen that smelled like cold tea. Vanessa was sitting at the table when I walked in, not reading, not on her phone, not doing any of the small, productive things she always filled her hands with. Just sitting, both palms wrapped around a mug she had stopped drinking from long enough ago that the steam was gone. She looked up when she heard me come through the door, and something in her face was different. The smile was not there. In 14 months of living in this house, Vanessa Reed had never once greeted me without that smile. Warm, practiced, perfectly calibrated to the precise emotional temperature of whatever room she was entering. I had told myself in the early months that it was simply who she was, a naturally warm person. I had believed that for longer than I should have. Tonight the smile was absent, and what was underneath it was something I had not seen on her face before. She looked exhausted and frightened, and underneath both of those, something that looked with unsettling honesty like relief. I sat down across from her. I did not ask if she was all right. I waited. Ethan called me today, she said. Her voice came out flat, stripped of its usual careful warmth, like a wire with the insulation removed. He said the doctor's report has been submitted to the court. He said the guardianship filing would go in by the end of the week. She pressed her lips together hard. And then he said if anything goes wrong, if there are any complications with the process, it's my name on the caregiver documentation, my signature on the medication logs, my face on the security camera footage every single morning for 14 months. Her hands tightened around the cold mug. Her knuckles had gone white. He said it very calmly. She continued, her voice dropping to something barely above a breath. That's what frightened me most. Not that he said it, that he said it the way you tell someone the weather. I looked at this woman across my kitchen table, this woman who had moved into my house 6 months after Eleanor died and cooked my meals and reminded me to take pills that were slowly dismantling my ability to think clearly. This woman, Ethan had placed in my life like a piece on a board. How long have you known what the medication was? I asked. My voice came out steady and low because I had learned in the past 10 days to keep my voice steady and low, regardless of what was happening inside my chest. Vanessa flinched, a small, sharp movement like someone who had been waiting for a blow and then felt it land anyway. I found out 4 months in, she said. He didn't tell me up front what the supplements were. He said they were vitamins, something to help with sleep and cognitive support for a man your age. She exhaled shakily. When I found out what was actually in them, I started reducing the doses. I couldn't make them disappear completely without him noticing, but I could make them smaller. The air in the kitchen felt very thin. You reduced the doses? I repeated. I know that's not enough. Her eyes filled suddenly and she blinked hard, pressing one hand flat against her mouth for a moment before pulling it away. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know what I've been part of, and I know there is no version of this where I walk away clean. But I need you to know I never wanted. Her voice broke fully on the last word, fracturing into something that was almost a sob caught and choked back down with visible effort. He told me no one would get hurt. He said it was paperwork. He said you'd be taken care of. Vanessa? I leaned forward and put my hands flat on the table, not touching hers, just close enough that she could feel that I was still in the room and still present, and still, despite everything, choosing to hear her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Do you have anything from Ethan messages, emails, recordings that shows he directed this? That shows it came from him. She looked at me for a long moment. Her jaw was working, her eyes red at the rims, her breath still unsteady. Then she reached into the pocket of her robe and set her phone on the table between us. 3 weeks ago, she said, He called me to go over the signing timeline. I had started recording his calls by then. I didn't know why, instinct maybe, fear. She unlocked the phone and opened a folder I had never seen before, buried 3 levels deep in her photo storage. He said I wrote it down after because I needed to see it in front of me. He said verbatim, "If this falls apart, Vanessa takes the fall. That's always been the deal. You're the wife. Everything you touched, you authorized." I stared at the screen, at the audio file icon and the timestamp. 3 weeks ago. The week after Ethan had told me Adrian was too busy to call. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it behind my back teeth. "There are also screenshots," Vanessa said quietly. "Text messages from the beginning, the original payment he made to my account, the instructions about the medication he wrote. Most of it, he preferred not to say things out loud." She swallowed. "I kept everything. I didn't know if I would ever use it, but I kept it." I exhaled slowly through my nose. "I'm going to need you to copy all of that to a drive and get it to Margaret Bennett, Eleanor's sister. Do you know who she is?" "The nurse." Vanessa nodded, a short, jerky movement. "Yes." "Can you do it without Ethan knowing?" "Yes." No hesitation. I stood up from the table, and Vanessa looked up at me with eyes that were still glassy, still frightened, still carrying the weight of 14 months of choices she could not take back. "Richard," her voice came out small and cracked at the edges. "I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I am so sorry." I looked at her for a moment. This woman Eleanor had never known, placed in my life by a son. Eleanor had tried so hard to love, despite everything. I thought about forgiveness and what it cost, and whether I had it in me right now. "I know," I said, and I meant it. That was the most honest thing I could give her tonight. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at Eleanor's side of the mattress in the dark. I needed to see Adrian. I had not stood in the same room as my son in 7 months, and there were things that needed to be said between us that no prepaid phone and no folded letter could carry. I just had to figure out how to reach him without Ethan seeing it happen. I told Vanessa I needed to pick up a prescription refill in Stamford. She offered to go for me. I said the drive would do me good fresh air, a change of scenery, nothing to worry about. She studied my face for just a half-second longer than usual, and I met her eyes with the mild, slightly unfocused expression I had been practicing for 2 weeks. She nodded and went back to her coffee. I pulled out of the driveway at 8:40 and turned onto Maple Street heading south, both hands on the wheel, the prepaid phone on the passenger seat. I had driven exactly 6 blocks when a gray sedan pulled up alongside me at the red light on the corner of Maple and Ridgewood. The passenger window came down. Adrian said, "Follow me." 2 words. His voice was low and calm and carried the specific gravity of a man who had not slept enough in a very long time. I looked at my son through the open window, and the sight of him hit me somewhere behind the sternum with a force I was completely unprepared for. He was thinner than I remembered. The lines around his eyes had deepened. He was wearing a jacket I had never seen, and his hair was longer than he had ever worn it in 42 years, and he looked in every external detail like a stranger. But his eyes were his eyes. They had always been Eleanor's eyes. I followed him. He led me to an old strip mall on the east side of Norwalk. Half the storefronts shuttered, the parking lot cracked and empty on a weekday morning. He parked at the far end away from the road. I pulled in beside him. He got out and came around to my passenger side and got in, and for one moment, we simply existed in the same space for the first time in 7 months. The 2 of us breathing the same air in a car in an empty parking lot, while a thin October wind moved through the bare trees at the edge of the lot. Then Adrian's face did something I had not seen it do since he was a boy. It cracked. Just for a second, a single fracture of control visible and raw before he pulled it back together. "Dad." His voice came out rough, scraped down to almost nothing. "I am so sorry. I need you to know that first, before anything else." My throat closed so completely I could not speak for a full 3 seconds. I pressed my hand over my eyes hard and breathed through my mouth and told myself, "Not here, not yet, hold on." And then I lowered my hand and looked at my son. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded like gravel. 7 months active, Adrian said. But I had suspicions for longer. The foundation discrepancies, I found them first before Lucas Perry. Mom asked me not to say anything to you while she was still here. She said she needed time to set things in place legally. She made me promise. His jaw worked. I have hated keeping that promise every single day. Something cracked open in my chest, not cleanly. Not all at once, but in the slow, terrible way of something that has been under pressure too long. She asked you to carry that alone. She asked me to carry it for you, Adrian said, and his voice broke on the last word just slightly just enough. She said you had enough to bear, that she didn't want you spending her last months watching for Ethan instead of watching her. I turned to face the windshield because I could not look at my son's face and hold myself together at the same time. The empty parking lot blurred in front of me. I pressed my back teeth together until the burning behind my eyes receded to something survivable. I believed him, I said. My voice came out hollowed out, ashamed, scraped thin. When Ethan said you didn't call because you didn't care, I told myself it wasn't true. But there was a part of me, Adrian, that let the doubt in. I let it sit there. I am so ashamed of that. Dad! Adrian put his hand on my forearm, and the grip of it firm and warm and real, in a way that nothing in the past 7 months had been nearly undid me completely. You were being medicated. You were grieving. You were surrounded by people whose entire job was to make you doubt yourself. You are 68 years old, and you held this together, and you figured out most of it on your own. His voice was fierce and low. Don't you dare apologize for being human. I pressed my fist against my mouth for a moment, breathed, steadied. Tell me the plan, I said. Adrian straightened. The crack in his composure closed, and the version of my son that had been doing this job for 7 months came back into his face. Focused, careful, precise. Detective Ryan Mercer runs the financial crimes unit out of the state police. We've been building the case together, the shell companies, the wire transfers, Monica Vance's involvement, Daniel Cross's forgery work. We have enough for arrest warrants on 3 counts each. He paused. But the guardianship filing changes the timeline. Once Ethan files formally, he can request emergency authority over your finances while the petition is pending. That's a window of hours, maybe less, where he could move money before the injunction lands. So, we need him to move before he files, I said. We need him to commit fully on the record in front of witnesses before he realizes what's happening. Adrian met my eyes, which means we need you to give him what he's been waiting for. We need him to believe completely and without any doubt that you are no longer the man who built Hale Foundation. I held my son's gaze for a long moment. Outside the car, a leaf skittered across the cracked asphalt. I can do that, I said. Dad, it's going to be hard. He's going to push. Dr. Crane will be there, Daniel will be there, and Ethan is going to be very confident because he is very close to what he wants. You cannot break character, not once. Adrian. I looked at my son steadily. I have been performing for that camera in my living room for 2 weeks. I have been smiling at the woman who was medicating me every morning. I have been answering Ethan's phone calls with warmth I do not feel. I paused. I can manage one more performance. Adrian exhaled a long, slow breath that carried 7 months of tension in it. He gripped my forearm once more hard, and I covered his hand with mine and held it there for a moment. Before he got out of the car, I said, Adrian. He turned. Your mother knew what she was doing when she trusted you with this. I want you to know I understand that now. His eyes went bright and wet for just a second. He blinked hard, nodded once, and got out of the car without another word. I watched the gray sedan pull away. Then I drove to the pharmacy, filled the prescription, and drove home. Ethan called at noon. Dad, I've set the signing for Saturday at 11. Arthur can come if you'd like him there. Dr. Crane will certify everything on the day. It's just paperwork to make sure you're protected. Saturday? I said in the slightly slower, slightly hazier voice I had been cultivating all week. Yes, that sounds fine. I hung up and sat in my car in my own driveway for 60 full seconds. Then I went inside and let the performance begin. Eleanor used to say I was the worst liar she had ever met. She said it fondly the way you describe a flaw in someone you love. Completely. My face, she claimed, gave everything away before my mouth had a chance to catch up. 31 years into our marriage, she could tell what I was thinking by the way I held my coffee cup. I thought about that on Monday morning when I sat down at the breakfast table and let Vanessa place the small ceramic dish in front of me, and I thought about it again when I put the pills on my tongue and raised my glass and held them in my cheek and said, "Good morning, sweetheart," in a voice as warm and uncomplicated as a man with nothing in the world to hide. Eleanor, I thought, you would have laughed, and then you would have helped me rehearse. Monday was small things. I left my coffee mug on the wrong counter, the one by the stove, not my usual spot by the window. Vanessa moved it back without comment. I called Vanessa by the wrong name, not dramatically, just once quietly, while she was turned away from me. "Could you hand me that Eleanor a beat?" Then I shook my head and said, "Sorry, I don't know where that came from." Vanessa turned slowly, and her face did exactly what it needed to do. A small, careful wince of concern, the expression of a devoted caregiver watching a man she worried about. She had understood from the moment we made our arrangement that she needed to perform her role as convincingly as I performed mine. "Of course," she said softly. "It's all right, Richard," and she handed me what I had asked for without another word. I heard Vanessa set down what she was holding very carefully. That evening, Ethan stopped by. He settled into the kitchen chair across from me with a coffee and asked how I was sleeping. I told him the nights were getting longer. He made a note on his phone, small, quick, trying not to be seen doing it. I had been seen doing it since the first day, Evereston Tuesday. I missed an appointment I had never actually scheduled. "I thought I had the foundation call at 2, I said, frowning at the kitchen calendar that held no such entry. "Didn't I write it down?" Ethan, who had stopped by, again he was stopping by every day now, pulling in close, the way a hawk circles before it commits, said, "No, Dad, there was no call today." His voice was gentle and patient, and filled with the particular tenderness of a man who believes he is watching his father dissolve. It made my stomach turn over with a fury I swallowed completely. Wednesday. I dropped a glass in the kitchen. The crash brought Vanessa running, and I stood looking at the pieces on the floor with an expression I had practiced in the bathroom mirror. Not distress, not embarrassment, but the blank, untethered look of a man who no longer fully understands the relationship between his hands and the objects in them. Vanessa crouched and started picking up the glass, and she said, "It's fine, it happens." And her voice was so carefully, deliberately normal that I understood she was performing too. We were both performing now. Two people in a kitchen full of cameras, each pretending for a completely different audience. Thursday morning, Dr. Crane came back. She sat across from me in the living room with her portfolio, and Ethan on the sofa, and the same laminated cards as before. This time, I answered slowly. I let my eyes drift to the window between responses, as if the thread of the question had briefly lost me. When she held up the clock card, I named it correctly, but after a pause of 4 full seconds that I felt Ethan clock from across the room. "Mr. Hale," Dr. Crane said, leaning slightly forward, her voice dropping to the register of careful concern. "Do you know what day it is today?" "Thursday," I said. Then I frowned as if testing the word. "I think Thursday. Is it Thursday?" Ethan shifted on the sofa. I heard the soft tap of his finger on his phone screen. Dr. Crane wrote something that took a long time to write. When she closed her portfolio, she said, "Mr. Hale, I want to thank you for your patience. I'll have my updated findings ready by end of day." She shook my hand. "You're doing wonderfully." After she left, Ethan sat beside me on the sofa and put his hand on my shoulder. "Dad." His voice was soft and thick, with something that sounded, God help me, almost like genuine love. "I just want to make sure you're safe. That's all this is." I looked at my son's face. This face I had watched learn to walk, learn to read, learn to drive, learn to grieve. This face that had cried at Eleanor's funeral and stood at her grave with his hands folded and his head bowed. This face that had been for 38 years the face of my younger son. My chest ached so deeply and so completely that for one terrible second I almost broke, almost reached over and grabbed his arm and said, "What? Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me there's an explanation. Tell me the son I raised is still in there somewhere." But I thought of Eleanor's letter. I thought of what she had written, "Trust what people show you, not what they tell you." Ethan had shown me enough. "Thank you, son," I said. My voice came out warm and a little tired and entirely convincing. "I know you're looking out for me." He squeezed my shoulder. "Saturday," he said. "Just paperwork, then everything gets easier." "Saturday," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Okay." He left at 6. The moment I heard his car clear the end of the driveway, I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and drank the entire thing standing at the sink, with my hands gripping the counter, because I needed something solid to hold on to. Friday morning, Margaret called on the prepaid phone. The lab results came back. Her voice was controlled in the way of someone who has made a decision to be controlled, holding the words tightly so they came out level. "Richard, there were 3 compounds. One of them is lorazepam. It's a prescription sedative, a controlled substance. Low dose consistent. The kind of amount that taken daily over several months would cause exactly what you described. A pause. Giving someone a controlled substance without their knowledge or a valid prescription is a felony in Connecticut. This is not a civil matter. This is criminal. I stood in the study with the phone pressed hard against my ear, the morning light coming through the blinds in the same thin, pale strips it always did, everything looking exactly as it always had. "I know," I said. "Can you get that report to Arthur Wells today?" "It's already on its way," Margaret said, then quieter. "Richard, are you ready for tomorrow?" I thought of the empty filing cabinet. I thought of Eleanor's handwriting on the trust envelope. I thought of Adrian's eyes in the parking lot, bright and wet, for one unguarded second. I thought of 51 years of building something with a woman who had loved me well enough to protect me from beyond her own death. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Saturday morning arrived gray and still. Vanessa made eggs I could not eat. At 10:45, the first car turned into the driveway. I watched from the upstairs window, counted the doors opening. Ethan, Daniel Cross, Dr. Crane. A fourth person I didn't recognize carrying a slim briefcase, a notary public, I would later learn hired privately by Ethan to formalize the signing on the spot. I straightened my collar, checked my reflection once. Then I went downstairs to lose everything so I could take it all back. The living room had been rearranged. I noticed it the moment I came off the last step of the staircase. My own furniture in my own house moved to accommodate a table set up in the center of the room like a stage. 2 chairs facing each other across it, a third chair off to one side. The credenza pushed back against the wall to make space. Someone had done this while I was upstairs. Someone had walked through the rooms Eleanor and I had lived in for 30 years and decided how they should be arranged for the purpose of taking them away from me. My jaw tightened behind my easy, slightly unfocused smile. Ethan stood at the window phone in hand and turned when he heard me on the stairs. "Dad?" The warmth in his voice was immaculate. "How are you feeling this morning?" "A little tired," I said. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way I had been moving all week. Didn't sleep well again. Daniel Cross sat in the corner with a laptop, open cables running to a portable printer on the side table. He glanced up when I entered and gave me a brief professional nod, the nod of a man who considered himself a technician, not a participant. Dr. Crane stood near the bookshelf with her portfolio already open pen clipped to the cover. The fourth person, a man in his 40s with a slim briefcase and the practiced blankness of someone hired for a specific task, sat near the window and did not introduce himself. Vanessa came from the kitchen with a tray of water glasses and set them on the table without looking at anyone directly. The doorbell rang at precisely 11 o'clock. Ethan's head turned toward the door with a small involuntary sharpness that he immediately smoothed over. He had not been expecting the bell. I had been expecting it. "I'll get it," I said mildly and shuffled toward the door. Arthur Wells stepped in, wearing his navy suit, carrying his dark leather case, silver hair perfectly in place. He shook my hand with both of his, and in the pressure of that grip, I felt everything that did not need to be said out loud. "I'm here, we're ready. Hold the line." "Richard," he looked at me steadily. "Thank you for including me." "You've always been part of the family, Arthur," I said. I heard Ethan come up behind me. "Arthur?" His voice was smooth, but there was something underneath it, something stretched thin. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "Richard asked me to be here," Arthur said pleasantly. "As his attorney of record. I hope that's not a problem." A beat. "Of course not," Ethan said. "The more the merrier." We all sat. Dr. Crane opened her portfolio and read her evaluation summary in the measured cadence of a professional who has rehearsed the language to remove anything that might sound like opinion. Moderate cognitive decline, difficulty with sequential memory, reduced capacity for independent financial decision-making. Her voice was perfectly level. Her conclusions were perfectly prepared. I sat across the table and let my eyes drift once toward the window, the way I had practiced the way a man does when the thread of a conversation has briefly lost him. Ethan leaned forward. "Dad, Dr. Crane's assessment means we can formalize the arrangement we talked about. I'll handle the foundation decisions and the property management, and you can focus on resting, on being comfortable. That's all I want for you." His voice was so gentle, so utterly devastatingly gentle. "That sounds fine," I said. "Whatever you think is best, Ethan. The relief that moved across my son's face in that moment, the slight drop of his shoulders, the exhale, the fractional relaxation around his eyes, was the most painful thing I had seen in 10 days of painful things. He had wanted this for so long. He was so close. Daniel Cross sent a document to the printer. It emerged with a soft mechanical hum, 2 pages the guardianship transfer, and the foundation trustee reassignment, printed clean and formal. Daniel set them on the table in front of me, along with a pen. Arthur said quietly, "Richard, would you like me to review these before you sign?" Ethan's hand moved slightly on the table. "I think we don't need to slow things down unnecessarily, Arthur." "I think we do," Arthur said, and his voice was still pleasant, still unhurried, still carrying the absolute composure of a man who has nothing to be afraid of. "Richard, take your time." I looked down at the documents, my name printed clearly on the signature line. Richard James Hale. I picked up the pen, my hand moved across the paper, and I wrote in the careful, deliberate cursive of a 68-year-old man who had learned his penmanship from his mother, Eleanor Ruth Hale. The room went completely still. I set the pen down and looked up with the mild, vaguely uncertain expression of a man who has just done something he cannot quite explain. Ethan stared at the signature. His face had gone the color of old chalk. "Dad," his voice came out strange, flattened, as if the air had been pressed out of it. That's not your name. Isn't it?" I tilted my head slightly the way I had practiced. I thought, I'm sorry, I don't know why I wrote that." Arthur stood. He leaned over the table, looked at the signature, and then looked at Ethan with an expression of complete professional calm that must have been to my son absolutely terrifying. "I'm afraid we need to pause," Arthur said. Daniel Cross bent toward his laptop, and then stopped, fingers hovering, face tightening. He tried a key, then another. He looked at the screen with the particular bewilderment of a man whose tools have just stopped working. Noah had locked that device remotely at 10:45 that morning from a coffee shop 3 miles away. In the hallway behind me, I heard the soft sound of the back door opening and closing, Vanessa stepping out for a moment, stepping out to hand Margaret a small black USB drive that she had been carrying in the pocket of her cardigan since 8 o'clock that morning. Arthur reached into his leather case and set a thick folder on the table, green, heavy, the color of old money and careful planning. "Before we go any further," he said in the voice of a man who has been waiting a long time to say exactly this, "I'd like to introduce Eleanor Hale's irrevocable trust." Ethan's eyes dropped to the folder. Something moved across his face, a recognition, and underneath it the first real crack of fear. Arthur opened the folder, and the room changed. I cannot explain it more precisely than that. One moment, we were sitting around a table in my living room, Ethan with his careful warmth, Dr. Crane with her professional composure, Daniel Cross with his locked laptop, the nameless notary with his slim briefcase, and then Arthur set those first pages on the table, and the temperature of the air itself seemed to shift. Like opening a window in a sealed room, like something that had been held back for a very long time, finally being allowed to move. Ethan leaned forward. "What is that?" "Eleanor Hale's irrevocable trust," Arthur said. He did not look up. He was turning pages with the unhurried precision of a man who had read this document many times and knew exactly where he was going. Executed 14 months before her death, witnessed, notarized, and registered with the Superior Court of Connecticut. He found the page he wanted and set it flat on the table, turning it so the text faced outward. "Specifically, I'd like to direct your attention to Clause 7. He read it aloud, every word. His voice was measured and clear and carried the particular weight of language that had been chosen by a careful woman with a great deal of love and a great deal of foresight. In the event that any party attempts to establish guardianship over Richard James Hale through fraudulent medical assessment, or takes action to manipulate the disposition of Hale Foundation assets without the consent of the named trustee, said party forfeits all inheritance rights, all claims to foundation assets, and all authority within Hale family holdings, effective immediately upon confirmation of said attempt. Ethan stood up. "As this is completely irrelevant to," he started, his voice sharp and rising. "Please sit down, Ethan." Arthur's tone had not changed by a single degree. "This document does not supersede a formal guardianship petition. It doesn't need to supersede it." Arthur turned another page. "It activates the moment the attempt is made, which it has been, on the record, in front of witnesses." He looked up at Ethan for the first time, and his eyes were perfectly calm. "Please sit down." Ethan sat. His hands were flat on the table, and his jaw was working, and his eyes had gone somewhere dark and calculating, searching the room for the exit he had always assumed was there. Dr. Crane had stopped pretending to write. She was very still, portfolio closed in her lap, and something in her face had gone careful and inward in the way of someone who is beginning to calculate the personal cost of what is happening around her. Arthur reached into his case again and placed a second document on the table. "This is a temporary restraining order signed yesterday afternoon by the Honorable Judge Patricia Harrison of the Connecticut Superior Court." His voice remained level and unhurried. "It freezes all asset transfers, all foundation account activity, and all transactions associated with HVR, Consulting LLC, Bridgeport Property Advisors, and Atlantic Horizon Partners, effective as of 8 o'clock this morning." He paused. "Mr. Cross, I would advise you not to attempt any further transmissions from that device." Daniel Cross looked at Arthur, then he looked at Ethan, then he looked at the door. The door opened from the outside. Detective Ryan Mercer, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s badge already visible on his belt, stepped through the front entrance with two officers in plain clothes behind him. He had the quiet, self-contained manner of someone who has executed warrants many times and found no drama necessary. He looked around the room once efficiently, the way a professional takes inventory. "Mr. Cross," he said, "would you come with us, please?" Daniel pushed his chair back. His face had gone completely flat, the expression of someone whose contingency plans have just run out. And then Adrian walked in through the back of the house. He came through the kitchen doorway, and I heard him, before I saw him, the specific sound of his footfall on the hardwood that I had known since he learned to walk. He stopped in the entrance to the living room, and he looked across the table at his brother, and something passed between them that I cannot describe and will not try to. Ethan's eyes moved from Adrian to me, and for one raw, unguarded second, every layer he had built over 38 years, every calculation, every performance, every careful construction of the devoted son fell away completely. What was underneath was something I recognized, a boy who had always believed he was owed more than he received, a man who had decided somewhere along the way that wanting something badly enough made taking it acceptable. My son, my younger son, who had cried at his mother's funeral and meant it even then. Even while planning this, the grief of that hit me so hard and so suddenly that my eyes burned and my throat sealed shut, and I pressed both hands flat against my thighs under the table and held myself together through sheer force of a will I had been building for 10 days. "You think this is over, Dad?" Ethan's voice came out, strange, stripped of warmth, stripped of performance, raw at the edges, in a way I had never heard from him before. "You really think a piece of paper from a dead woman stops this?" I looked at my son across the table. My throat was aching. My chest was aching. Every part of me was aching with a loss that no court order could address and no injunction could undo. "I know it does," I said. My voice came out steady, quiet, completely certain. Mercer moved forward. "Mr. Hale," he said, and he was looking at Ethan, not at me, because there was only one Mr. Hale in this room who needed to hear what came next. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Ethan did not look at me again. He looked at the floor while Mercer continued, and his hands went behind his back, and that was the last clear image I held of my younger son that morning. I sat at the table in my living room, and I did not move. Adrian came and stood beside me and put his hand on my shoulder, and I reached up and covered it with mine, and the two of us stayed like that, while the room slowly emptied around us. Outside, through the front window, I watched a car pull away down Birchwood Lane with my son inside it. The roses along the front walk were still blooming. Eleanor had planted them the year we bought the house. The morning after they took Ethan away, my house felt like a courtroom that had already delivered its verdict, but hadn't yet cleared the gallery. There were still coffee cups on the counter, two of them, one mine, one Vanessa's, sitting exactly where we'd left them before the world changed. The couch cushions were crooked from where Daniel Cross had shoved past the armrest when the officers moved in. A single pen lay on the floor near the fireplace, the same pen Ethan had uncapped with such confidence when he slid those guardianship papers toward me. I picked up the pen. I turned it over in my fingers. Then I set it on the mantelpiece right next to Eleanor's photograph. "You saw all of this coming, didn't you?" I said to her, picture my voice cracking like old timber. You built the door, and you handed me the key, and you still had to watch me almost lose everything before I used it. My chest ached so deeply, I had to press one hand flat against it just to keep standing. Adrian arrived at 9 that morning with Detective Renee Caldwell from the Fairfield County Financial Crimes Unit, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who carried a legal pad like a weapon. She had worked alongside Detective Mercer on the financial side of the investigation from the beginning. Mercer handled the arrests, Caldwell handled the money. She shook my hand firmly at the door. "Mr. Hale, I know yesterday was a lot," she said, studying my face. "But we need to go through everything while it's fresh. Every document, every transaction, every conversation you can remember. I've been waiting months to have this conversation," I told her, and my voice didn't waver once. We sat at the dining room table for 4 hours. Adrian laid out the thumb drive Lucas Perry had prepared, the deleted emails recovered from the Foundation's server, the shell company registrations, the transfer records. Detective Caldwell spread the pages across the table like she was building a map of a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was. 3 LLCs, she said, tapping each page in turn. HVR, Consulting Bridgeport Property Advisors, Atlantic Horizon Partners. None of them conducted any legitimate business activity. Total confirmed transfers, $375,000. And that's before we get to the endowment. The $4.2 million. Adrian said, his jaw tight. He hadn't moved it yet, Detective Caldwell confirmed. The emergency freeze Arthur Wells filed stopped that transfer with less than 48 hours to spare. I pressed both hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking. 48 hours. Eleanor had given me a 48-hour window, and I had almost been too broken to use it. "What happens now?" I asked. Adrian leaned forward. "Ethan's looking at elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges. Daniel Cross goes down for unauthorized surveillance and document forgery. Dr. Crane will lose her license, the medical board was notified this morning, and Monica Vance." He paused, exhaling hard. "Federal wire fraud, 5 to 10. And Vanessa?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. Detective Caldwell glanced at her notes. "She's a cooperating witness. Full disclosure, documented from the beginning. The DA is recommending a suspended sentence and community service. No prison time." I nodded slowly. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. I mostly felt the weight of all those weeks I had spent eating breakfast across from her, pretending not to know what she had done, watching her pretend not to know that I knew. "She was scared," I said finally. "That doesn't make it right, but she was scared." Nobody argued with me on that. Olivia called that afternoon, her voice thick. "Noah keeps asking me if Grandpa Richard is okay," she said. "I don't know what to tell him." "Tell him his grandfather is angry and exhausted and grateful," I said. "Tell him all 3 of those things are true at the same time." She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for weeks. "Richard, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I knew something was wrong for months. Olivia!" I stopped her gently but firmly. "You came. That's what matters." She burst into tears on the other end of the line, great heaving sobs that told me she'd been holding that guilt like a stone in her chest for longer than she'd admitted. My own eyes burned. I gripped the phone tighter. "Hey," I said softly. "We're going to be all right, I promise you." That evening, Margaret drove up from Stamford and sat with me on the back porch. The garden was quiet. The storage shed door hung slightly open. I hadn't been able to bring myself to close it all the way since the night this all began. "Eleanor would be furious," Margaret said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "Eleanor would be satisfied," I corrected her. "She planned for this, every single piece of it." Margaret looked at me with wet eyes and a smile that trembled at the corners. "She loved you in the most practical way I've ever seen anyone love another person." I looked out at the garden, at the rose bushes Eleanor had planted the spring before she got sick, bare now in the autumn cold, but the roots still holding deep in the ground. "I know," I said, and for the first time in months, my voice came out steady. "I know she did." March came in quietly the way it always does in Connecticut, not with warmth, but with the suggestion of it. The frost had begun to pull back from the edges of the garden, and the rose bushes Eleanor had planted along the south fence were pushing out their first pale green buds, slow and stubborn, and absolutely certain of themselves. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and watched those buds like they owed me something. 4 months had passed since the night Adrian's sedan pulled up beside me in that empty Norwalk parking lot and changed the direction of everything. 4 months since the papers were signed, the bait was taken, and my son was let out of this house in handcuffs. 4 months, and I still hadn't figured out how to feel about all of it at once. The sentencing hearings wrapped up in late February. Arthur Wells drove me to the Bridgeport courthouse himself, which I hadn't asked him to do, but which I was deeply grateful for when I found myself gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles went white. "You don't have to go in," Arthur said from the driver's seat, watching me carefully. "Yes, I do," I told him. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I've been waiting 68 years to understand that boy. I'm not missing my last chance to look at him." Arthur pressed his lips together and gave a short nod. "Then let's go." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Ethan stood in a charcoal suit that was slightly too large for him. Now he'd lost weight in 4 months, his jaw sharper, his eyes carrying something I hadn't seen in them since he was very young. Not remorse exactly. Something closer to exhaustion. The judge read the term 7 years in a state correctional facility, eligible for parole review. After 4 of the federal wire fraud charges had been folded into a consolidated sentence, Arthur explained afterward, which kept jurisdiction at the state level. Ethan's attorney nodded mechanically. The court clerk's pen scratched across paper. Then Ethan turned and found my face in the gallery. I didn't look away. I kept my eyes on him steady, direct, letting him see every single thing I felt, because I was done performing for anyone in that family. His chin trembled, his jaw tightened as he fought it. And then very quietly, his shoulders dropped like a man finally setting down something unbearably heavy. "Dad," he mouthed. Just that. One word. My throat closed so fast it burned. My eyes filled until the whole courtroom blurred at the edges. I pressed one fist against my sternum and breathed through it slow and deliberate, because I was not going to fall apart inside a courthouse. But God, it hurt. It hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not the anger, not the betrayal, but the grief of watching my own son become someone I didn't recognize, and realizing I might never fully understand when that happened. Daniel Cross received 4 years. Dr. Sylvia Crane surrendered her medical license and faced a civil suit from 3 other families whose evaluations she had manipulated. Monica Vance was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $612,000. Vanessa completed her community service requirement, packed her things quietly, and left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter that said, "Only, I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner." I kept the note. I don't know why, I just couldn't throw it away. On a Saturday in early March, Noah came over with a lawnmower he'd borrowed from Olivia's neighbor. He was 16 years old and absolutely determined to do something useful with his hands, which is one of the finest qualities a person can have. "You don't have to do that," I told him from the porch steps. He looked up at me, squinting against the thin winter sun, and grinned a wide, uncomplicated grin that cracked something open in my chest in the best possible way. "Grandpa Richard," he said, "the grass isn't going to mow itself." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts in your gut and catches you off guard. The kind I hadn't heard come out of myself in so long, it felt like meeting an old friend. "No," I agreed, sitting down on the top step. "I suppose it isn't." I watched him work while the pale March sun moved slowly across the yard, and somewhere behind me, inside the house, the old clock on the mantelpiece ticked forward the way it always had, the way Eleanor had wound it every Sunday morning, without fail, for 31 years. Later that evening, I sat in her armchair with the lamp on and her photograph in my hands. "The court gave me back the house," I told her. "The foundation accounts are frozen. Arthur says the estate is intact." I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. "But you already knew all that was going to happen, didn't you? You planned it down to the last signature." Outside, the wind moved through the garden, and the rose bushes swayed bare branches, catching the last of the light roots holding firm in the cold ground. "The court could return everything they took from me," I said quietly, my voice thickening. "But it couldn't give me back the year I spent being afraid inside my own home. It couldn't return the mornings I sat across from Ethan and pretended not to know. It couldn't give back what it felt like to watch my son look at me and see only an asset." I set her photograph down gently on the side table. "But I'm still here, Eleanor. The house is still standing, and those roses you planted, they're coming back." I pressed my hand over my heart and held it there. "So am I." There is something I have learned from all of this, something I could not have put into words on that September night, when I crouched in a garden shed with my heart hammering and my hands shaking, listening to my own son walk through my house like a stranger. I learned that the people who hurt us most are rarely strangers. They are the ones who know exactly which door to walk through because we gave them the key. I was a father who loved both his sons completely, and I was a father who stopped paying attention to what love actually looked like in practice, who confused presence with loyalty and silence with peace. Do not make that mistake. If something in your home feels wrong, trust that feeling earlier than I did. Ask the hard questions before someone else forces them on you. I also believe this, and I say it as a man who has sat with a great deal of regret. You cannot outplan betrayal entirely, but you can build your life on something solid enough that when the betrayal comes, it does not take everything. Eleanor built that for me. She did it quietly without asking for credit, out of a love I am still only beginning to fully understand. In the end, God gave me back more than I deserved: a son who never stopped protecting me, a grandson who showed up with a lawnmower and no explanation, and a house that is still standing.